Welcome back to Film Schooled. I have a very special Halloween treat for all of you today. I'm sitting down with screenwriter Jessica Landry to talk about her work on the 2024 slasher film Killer Body Count. Directed by Danishka Esterhazy, this film follows a young girl who's mistakenly labeled as a sex addict and is sent away to a religious reform camp. Soon after arriving, her and the other kids in the camp start being pursued by a masked killer. As somebody who spends a lot of time on the Preacher Boys podcast talking about religious trauma and a lot of free time talking about horror films, this was a perfect movie for me. And I had so much fun talking to Jessica about her experience making the film, what it was like kind of subverting the male gaze, what it was like working with a company like Tubi, bringing an independent film to life, and so much more. I really hope you guys enjoy this entire episode. And as always, have a very safe and happy Halloween. Let's get into the conversation. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Jess, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Before we get into the film that kind of brought us here together, I kind of want to go back to the very beginning for you. Like, I'm looking at posters and items on your shelf, and I feel like you're a longtime horror fan. Is that a pretty safe bet?
That's pretty safe to say. Yeah, I have a lot of memorabilia of things that strike joy in my heart, like my Thing poster, my American Werewolf in London poster. Those are two of my favorite movies of all time. And I, of course, have a mask from They Live and next to the Necronomicon, and then fittingly a mask from Killer Body Count.
Yeah, you've got to add that.
Why not?
When did you get like the first taste of like, oh, I'm really interested in this genre? Like, what was it? Something as like super young that was something you saw too early? Was it something like your family was all into it and it just happened? Like, what was kind of the first bite there?
My family hates horror. I have one auntie that loves it, and so her and I kind of bonded over that. But even before then, it always was something that, I don't know, just like for some reason drew me in. I've always loved it. I've always loved creepy things. I have a black cat also. Not that he's creepy. He's very sweet, but he fits the genre very well.
Yeah.
For me, the first memory I kind of have is watching Pet Sematary and being terrified at the cat, actually, right? The dead cat that comes back, and getting a lot of nightmares from that. But it kind of snowballed from there to like explore a bunch of other things in it. And I, of course, coming into horror, like the first books I read were Stephen King. Weirdly enough, Drawing of the Three, which is more, I would say, like westerny sci-fi kind of, and not like super horror for him. But that was kind of my first introduction to the genre, and it just kind of went from there.
Was it something where, because it feels like there's always like 2 points, like everybody I've talked to, it's like you love movies, which I think that's pretty much everybody, unless you're insane, like everybody loves movies. But then there's like the extra layer of people who sit there and they're in a theater and they see a moment and then they go like, I want to make movies or I want to write movies. Like, for you, was the writing bug something that came from like reading a Stephen King and it's like, oh, I want to write books? Or was it always like, I want to be involved somehow in making movies specifically?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I love, love, love movies and TV. I love books too. I maybe love movies and TV more than I love books. Just don't tell them that. But, I started actually writing short stories and coming from that kind of space. And what really inspired me, aside from Stephen King, was Clive Barker. So that's kind of like a double-edged sword there, because he also writes books and does movies. And so I kind of had like the 1-2 punch of like Hellraiser the movie and then the Hellbound Heart the book. So to see him and to read more of his stuff and see how wildly creative he is really inspired me to get going, at least in the writing space. And then for movies, I mean, like I said, I've always loved movies. I never really thought that I could make movies. It seemed like this impossible thing to do and to accomplish. Like, how do you even get into this? But I think the movie that kind of made me realize that maybe I could do something was actually Saw.
Interesting.
Randomly.
Okay.
I was like, I think I was 17 or 18 when it came out. And I remember going to see it in the theaters. And the first time I saw it, that twist, my God, how
Yeah,
can you
right.
not love that twist? And I went back and I actually saw it a couple more times in theaters, so I definitely helped their box office that year that it came out. But yeah, for me, it was just like wow, and then to learn the story of how James Wan and Lee Winnell kind of made it and did it on like a
Right.
shoestring budget and like its origins and stuff. It was like okay, maybe there is like a path into this weird, mysterious world of movies.
Right. Yeah. I was interviewing I interviewed Charlie Clouser, who did the theme for Saw, which is like,
Iconic,
yeah,
yeah,
like I told him, I was like, when you have somebody on, you gotta like pump them up in some area. And then it's like, but I don't even know how to do it more than being like, oh, one of the top 5 or 6 like most iconic themes ever.
right.
But it was funny talking to him because he was in there from the first movie. And
Hmm.
I remember like sitting down talking to him about Saw X, and I was like, did you think when you saw like this super low budget horror movie that you'd be at like Saw 10 and they'd be calling you every year? He was like, no. So
Fair.
yeah, so you've expressed some interest in a lot of movies that, I mean, Saw, when Saw came out, for me, like, I mean, I was like 8 when the first Saw movie came out. And then when I was in high school, I think it was like final chapter had just come out, and one of my friends had all of the Saw movies downloaded, and we were going to a basketball tournament. And we're a super small Christian school. We're not big into R-rated movies, anything like that. And we're in the back of the church van, literally watching all of the Saw movies in order, just like, oh my gosh, through every single scene. So it felt like when I hear the stories of people like sneaking like video nasties in their bedroom as kids, like that's me with Saw. Like, oh, we're in the back watching somebody like on the rack getting twisted around. And um yeah, so getting into writing specifically, like, what was the first step where you were like, oh, I'm actually going to try doing something in this realm to make money? Like, I'm sure there were times you were like, I'm going to write something for fun, but like, when's the first time you're like, oh, this is a commercial venture I can kind of jump into?
Yeah, I mean, for me, starting off with short stories, ain't no money there, that's for sure. So it very much started as just a passion, right? And just something that I wanted to do more and get better at and see what could come from it. Um, for me, my career before being a filmmaker, I worked in graphic design. So
Okay.
at some points, there'd be a lot of downtime or you're just waiting for like customer feedback or whatever. So like, okay, I'm going to take a minute and I'm just going to, jot down some story ideas and see what happens. And then it eventually began to take over some of the day job work. Don't tell my bosses, my former bosses, not that they can do anything
Right.
about it now. But yeah, so from there, I mean, I took some schooling online just to like try and better myself and see what other fields existed within writing. And at that point, screenwriting had not really been a focus. It had
Sure.
just been more short stories in horror, of course, because I don't know if I could write anything else. But yeah, so I ended up taking an online course, and the final project was to write a screenplay. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll try this. I mean, I
Yeah.
like movies enough. I've seen enough. I could probably whip something out. And that first screenplay that I wrote um, kind of opened a lot of doors for me. It got me into, I'm in Canada, I'm Canadian.
Okay.
So it got me into a bunch of different programs that we have up here. The first one that I got into was Whistler Film Festival Screenwriters Lab. That was like a huge one that I was able to get into and kind of like get mentorship from people who were actively working in the industry and kind of learned how to like break down a script and then build it back up.
Right.
And that with that same script, I got my first paid writing
Wow.
job for a TV movie, which I've done a lot of Lifetime movies.
Yeah.
I mean, they're you know what you're getting into
Sure.
them when
Yeah.
you watch them and when you write them. But I mean, they're a lot of fun to definitely work on and create because they have such like a rabid fan base, right? There's
Yeah.
always this huge demand for these Lifetime thriller movies. So I've written a whole bunch of them now, and I mean they're great. But it's always wonderful to kind of focus more on your own stuff and your own interests. And so yeah, that MOW, that TV movie route was kind of how I broke in and got my first job.
Yeah, that's super cool. And it's such a different story than so many screenwriters I've talked to, where it's like, I wrote my first script and then my second and my third, and nothing happened for like 10 years, you know? So that's pretty
Yeah.
amazing to have that kind of sudden burst, you know, kind of going into that scene. And looking through your filmography, it's like you've got a pretty consistent flow of projects. It's looked like over that time period. Um, I,
Mhm.
I got to ask in terms of Lifetime really quick for those projects, like obviously they have a machine that makes these movies like constantly. And I think Rebecca McKendry was talking about on her podcast, like working on a Lifetime movie. And she was saying like they had like their rule book of some things that you have to do. Like, I think she was saying with like, if there's a killer, you have to show who they are in the beginning and then like reveal it. Like you can't reveal it later in it. Like, was it, how much constraint is there? Is it like stepping into a TV show where it's like they have their showrunner that's kind of guiding what they should feel like? Or do you have a lot of freedom and then they take it and do their style on top of it? Like, what's kind of the process there?
They definitely have a set of elements that they need to have in there. And that's like, yeah, kind of like the overview of everything. Um, yeah, that first act, you kind of always want to include all your characters in there.
Mhm.
So that way there's no like, it's not like a slasher movie where it's like, who could it be? And then it's someone completely different.
Right.
Um, so yeah, you can't really like, I mean, like all that to say is that there you can certainly be creative within the elements. For me, what I try to do, because I love horror so much, is that for some of them I've started using like character names from horror movies as the character names in the Lifetime movies.
Interesting.
So there's one that exists out there that has like all the characters from Halloween named in there, and then maybe I threw in Haddonfield in there too because why not?
Yeah, why
And
not?
then there's another one with the Thing characters, of course. So it's just like you can have some flexibility in things, and if you throw in stuff like that, people won't necessarily catch on because not
Right.
everybody loves horror as much as everybody else.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's fun to have like little like Easter eggs and things, and I try to do that to kind of keep my sanity as I write them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's that's funny. And it's funny how much a lot of that's going to slip by a lot of Lifetime viewers, but I'm sure there's a lot of people too. Like my wife watches a lot of like Hallmark, and especially around Christmas time, like it's on nonstop. But
Yeah.
we're always laughing because there's so much crossover between the people in horror movies that I watch and then the Hallmark movies that she watches. I'm like, oh my God, that's the guy from Freddy versus Jason. Like, and I just hold on to that nugget through the whole movie of like, this is going to carry me through this, you know? Um,
Absolutely. I think Bruce Campbell has even been in a few
yeah, he
like
was in
Hallmark and
one
Lifetime movies.
last year. You're watching, waiting for the switch to happen. And you're like, oh, this is just actually a peaceful movie. Okay. Interesting. So going into Killer Body Count, which is,
Hmm.
you know, not a Lifetime movie. This is completely original film. Like, was that something that you just wrote and sold? Was it something that they wanted to do this movie and you came in and did it? Like, how'd you kind of get introduced to that project?
The idea is my own. It's something I came up with. And I had been talking with a company called Blue Ice
Okay.
Pictures, based in Toronto. And they had been looking for something to do with Tubi because they had, I guess, a deal with them, and they were outputting a couple movies to do with them. And so I sent them a few log lines of stuff that I thought would be fun to do. And Body Count, as it was just known back then, was the one that they picked. So I was like, okay, great. I can go to town on this because this is like very a story very close to my heart, very personal in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And they were very open to kind of just, working with it and seeing what happens and kind of taking it from that log line and developing it into a feature. It did start as something completely different than what is on Tubi right now. It was a bit more cosmic,
Hmm.
but Tubi was like, no, let's just go for a slasher. And I was like, okay, I can do that too,
Yeah.
right? The elements kind of stayed the same. It's just removing the cosmicness of it all,
Hmm.
which one day I will still write that movie, but this movie was not it. But anyway, yeah, no, they were very, very supportive, very open. They really pushed for the gore as much
Oh,
as
I'm
they
surprised to hear
wanted, which
that.
which was
Yeah.
great. Yeah, they were very supportive of that, and I was like, "That's wonderful. I can, I can do that for you, absolutely."
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the whole process was great. It took from start to finish for writing for me anyway. I would say about 6 months for everything, which is pretty fast
Okay.
for these kinds of things. And of course, as a writer, you always want to have a little bit more time to really flesh stuff out and stuff. But the TV side of things often moves very fast, so you have to uh, just kind of go with the flow. And that's something that I learned from doing the Lifetime movies because
Yeah.
those push out even faster than like 6 months. So it was a challenge for sure, but it was a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super cool. Yeah. I was super impressed because I just stumbled. I love Tubi because they have like the most random movies ever. And so like,
Truly.
especially like every once in a while I go down the rabbit hole of like, I'm going to watch every Giallo from like 1974, and it's like, you go to Tubi and it's like, they have everything. Sometimes like like it looks like they literally ripped a VHS tape and we're like, here, this one too. And,
Yeah.
and then like the Tubi original side, like has been like so memed in the last like 2 years. So like, for a while I would see like Tubi original, like, okay, I'm not here for that. I'm going to go down to all the movies I'm here for. And then I don't remember how I found out about Killer Body Count, but I think it was either someone I followed on Letterboxd who watches a lot of the same stuff as me, like logged it. And I was like, that's interesting. Why this? And then I read the description of it. And I was like, oh, this is for me. Okay. So we've got religious trauma
Mm,
and horror. Okay, let's do it. So
there we go.
going in and watching it, I was like, oh, this is like a real gem sitting here. And I'm a big fan of like the Chucky TV series and like Scream Queens when it was on. And like I love like the movies that like kind of capture that kind of like 2000s camp slasher. Like I love that vibe. And so
Yeah.
like I was like, oh, this is 100% for me, like all the way through. A lot of the style in this movie is Danishka Esterhazy, the director. Like she's made a point in, and I came across her through her Slumber Party Massacre remake and was like, oh, this is interesting. And she's very intentionally been subverting like kind of the male gaze from horror in her projects. How much of the tone of Killer Body Count would you say is original script versus like her coming in with that kind of lens? Like, or was that very collaborative of like, how do we take this slasher movie trope and flip it on its head?
Yeah, it was a very collaborative process with her. She came in, I forget at what point, but I think I'd already written the first draft.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been very important to me to get a woman directing it. That was kind of
Yeah.
a huge stipulation of mine. And so when they were like, okay, we got Danishka, I was like, okay, great.
Yeah. She'll get it.
She's very capable. Yeah, she understands the assignment. So when she came in and we started talking about the script and all the stuff, she had a lot of great ideas on, what she would do visually to reflect what I had written. And I mean, for her and I, we were very much on the same page of a lot of things. Strangely enough, we're both from the same city, but had never met until after this movie. So
Huh.
it was really nice to get to work with her and to actually get to meet her when she came to town just after she had shot it. And she brought me a whole bunch of goodies from the set too, which was really nice.
One of which is behind you.
One of which is behind me. There it is. Hey.
So Danishka obviously, and with Slumber Party Massacre had already. Do you remember what that came out for? Because I remember like there was like a series of movies in that vein that all came out. And I was like, why are we getting all these like essentially like really cool made for TV movies in a short period? But I don't remember what it was, if it was Shudder or if
I don't believe it was Shudder.
Sci-Fi,
I
I
know.
think.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Because Sci-Fi was did like this tear of like they did the Day of the Dead series, they did like Slumber Party Massacre. There was like a couple more, and I was like, what's going on? Like what exec just slipped in and it was like green light all of this right now. And Slumber Party Massacre was one that got a lot of attention from a lot of people. And again, like I said, so many of those, her name on it when I clicked on the movie was another piece where I was like, okay, like I know kind of what I'm getting. And there's going to be some, I had seen her take a low budget and make something that's really cool and looks better than its budget. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
big pieces of that is just the visuals themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
when I felt safe, because there's like a moment in a movie where you feel safe or you feel like, oh, should I eject myself from this right now? And that opening shot, like coming down from the overhead through the tent, I was like, okay, that's way more creative than establishing shot of moon to people in tent. Um, you mentioned a graphic design background. I have to imagine you're writing with a lot of visuals in mind in the script. Like, did you write for a lot of those scenes? Like even the scenes where she's behind the tree and they're set up by the fire, and there's like these very geometrically like organized, cool shots. Like, was that all script, or was that again like were you watching like, oh my god, I would have never thought to shoot it that way?
I think as a writer, like for me too, I'm a director also. I'm kind of I try to think about that for sure. But if I know that I'm writing just as a writer, then I won't try to do too much in that realm. I'd leave it up to the director to kind of do their thing and work it out. So for this one, knowing that I wasn't going to direct it, I just kind of I still write things very detailed, and I of course can see everything in my brain. So I'm like, okay, and then they're over here, and then they're over here, and they're doing this. Like I had the whole ending sequence kind of going off in my head of like the big fight scene, and then them hitting the neon lights, and then having it say "eat shit" in the
Yeah.
background. Like that was a very important moment to me, and I think Denise pulled it off very well. But yeah, no, like just in terms of writing and stuff, I mean, I can only dictate so much. At the end of the day, it is the director that
Right.
will make the decisions on how like the scenes are blocked.
Right. It's like writing detailed acting notes, like a single tear fills your eye. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. Um,
I do that sometimes, though. I will say.
what's the biggest like sitting down to write this? Like obviously writing a slasher is it's I have to imagine, and I always think about like if I were to make a narrative film, like I think slasher would be such a fun thing to do, but it's also like intimidating because there's so many and so many that are not good and so many that are great. Like and then there's people that watch slashers are like the most critics ever. They have certain things they want. Were you pulling, like, did you sit down and watch a bunch of slashers to see like what to avoid and what not to, or like did you just have the encyclopedia in your mind of like, I want to kind of take this moment and twist it? Like what are some of the slasher greats that were like pumping through your veins as you wrote?
I definitely have an encyclopedia in my brain of all these movies. I have definitely watched all of them more than once. But I did sit down and I watched all the Scream movies again,
Hmm,
just because that was something that Tubi really wanted to get like the tone of. And I think Killer Body Count ended up being a little bit more on the funny side as opposed to Scream.
sure.
But Scream actually had like a lot of funny moments in it,
Right.
which I didn't realize. Because I mean, the first time I had seen those movies, I mean, for you it was the Saw movies growing up, right? For me, it was the Scream
Yeah.
movies. So, I've always kind of loved them, even 4 and 5,
Yeah.
despite their flaws. But no, it was really fun to just kind of go back and like be like, no, I have to watch these for work. This is work right
Yeah.
now. I need to sit down and watch all of these movies. But yeah, and just kind of go through and try and like think of it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but think of different ways to kill people, right? Like,
Yeah.
what could I possibly use that nobody has really done before?
Right.
And I tried to also keep it religiously themed,
Mm-hmm.
kind of fitting in with the whole theme of the movie. I tried to pull as many death sequences as I could from the Bible to see. And there was one that didn't make the final cut, which really broke my heart. But Dan, the Jesus boy,
Mm-hmm.
he was supposed to have nice, like, Jesus-y hair, but he did not, which is okay. He was supposed to get decapitated by crawling through like a thorny bush and getting his hair tangled in the bushes, which is directly from the Bible and happened to somebody. And then they
Yeah.
ended up getting decapitated. That got cut for many reasons, which is okay. But it would have been great to see, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tried to do as many biblically themed deaths as I could. So like the locker room scene getting crushed under the weights, that is an homage to people being crushed by rocks in the Bible. That happened.
Yeah.
When Toby gets it in the confessional booth, he gets a spear in the side. That's another reference. Um, the thurible to the face is not not something that happened in the Bible, but I mean, who knows? Who's to say that it hasn't
Who
happened
knows?
before? We don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just tried to keep it as themed as I could because I thought that was it's kind of a funny way to explore those attacks.
So I got to ask this, and I can't believe I didn't ask it sooner. This movie, like I said, for me, it hits on a lot of layers, like as someone who loves horror, and then also as someone who has seen firsthand many religious horrors through his life. Is that your background, like, or was that something that you just are, as an outside observer, were like, this is a weird subculture, let's talk about it?
I grew up Roman Catholic.
Okay.
I'm now an atheist. For me, growing up, I mean, my parents were obviously religious. That's where it kind of all stems from, right? It's like your family is into it. So when you're little, you have no choice but to be into it. You follow your parents, you don't question them. But for me, as I grew up, and, became more aware of things, just going to church, like, didn't sit well with me. It was never something that I really liked doing. I always thought it was a little weird. And, like, no shade or anything to anybody who's Catholic. Like, it's all good. Like, do your own thing. But for me, it's not my thing.
Yeah.
And so I always kind of looked at it critically. I do that for all organized religion.
Sure.
I'm not a huge fan of it. But like I say, like, if that's your thing, if you believe in a higher power, amazing. That's great. For me, I don't love it when people try to push that upon other people, right? Or try to take like a Bible verse and spin it to their own sort of hateful beliefs. I'm not into that at all.
Or putting
And
them
so
in a
that's,
summer camp and killing them one by one. Like any
I mean, yeah,
religious activities like that are no go.
they're a no-go, and I'm sure that's happening. So we have to put a stop to that. But yeah, it's just that sort of thing just doesn't sit well with me. And I mean, I'm kind of in a weird spot where I can write a slasher movie about it, and people have watched it, and people like you are responding to it,
Yeah.
which I think is wonderful to see, because there is a lot of trauma that comes from religion.
Yeah.
And it affects us all kind of differently. We all have different experiences with it and everything like that. Some, of course, very more severe, some not as severe, but trauma is trauma.
Yeah.
And, if something is causing you trauma, then I say remove it from your life as fast as you can, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's that. I'm glad you answered that, because I was curious. Like, it again, it felt so timely, because like my other podcast that I do, I talk about religious abuse and trauma. So like that's kind of the two worlds, is like movies and that. And a lot of people I interview on that show were sent away to religious reform schools or conversion therapy or troubled teen homes. And so like I've seen movies that come out where like people are just like, oh, they've observed it and they think it's interesting. And then there's other things from like, there's some things that feel a little too like known, from the author side to be like, oh, I studied this for a week. And then we're like, I'm going to jot this down. So I was curious about the background.
For me too, being as a woman too, right? And growing up through the church and like seeing how, women and sexuality are two things that everybody tries to keep very separate and shuns women for being sexually active,
Right.
whereas kind of turns a blind eye to the boys when they do it too. That was a huge thing for me. Like, equality for everybody. Like, everybody is a sexual being. That's okay. That's wonderful. Like, nobody should be ever interfering with who you love or why you love them, or if you just want to get laid. Like, it's really not that big of a deal, but some religions tend to think it is.
Was anybody in the script influenced by people you knew in real life or situations that you experienced in real life? Or you're like, I'm not going to say that. I wrote them mysteriously for a reason.
Let me think how I could say that.
You're like, yes, next question.
The authority figures for sure.
Yeah.
I think when you're younger, especially when you're a teenager, especially when you're a girl, a lot of men feel like they have a say in your body and what you do with your body. And that is something that, I have a daughter. She's very young now, and I'm trying to be very cognizant of how I talk to her about, she's only 8, so she still has a while to go before
Sure.
she gets into this phase of things.
Yeah.
But still, it's like being aware from the start of how to make sure that she is confident within herself and how she knows that it's her body, her choice. She can make her own decisions, and just, telling her to be smart about things, right? When the time comes. And that's not necessarily something that I had growing up. I had probably the opposite of that. And it fucks with you for sure, right? Like, it messes you up, and it takes a lot of the therapy for some people, writing slasher movies for other people, to kind of figure out how to navigate that, right? And how to openly have a conversation about it.
Yeah. It's something. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and it is funny looking back, not to sidetrack into just religious conversation for the next, 30 minutes, but it's somewhat unavoidable given the premise, but it's one of those things. Like, now I look back at like my friends who were girls raised in the church, and I'm just like, as a dad, I can't imagine putting my kids in this like toxic circle of like teaching. But even beyond that, like, just like beyond just like the guilt and shame and things, like the feeling of powerlessness of not being able to do anything, like the fact that like the denomination I grew up in, like the dream of being having a job was like not a reality for like a lot of the kids. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm gonna get married, I'm gonna have kids, I'm gonna do the Duggar thing, like it's gonna be that's going to be my life. Like, my job is to be a wife and a mom first and foremost, and some got to do jobs if they had the cool parents, but it's like, that's a really sad thing, and I just feel super conscious about it. I resonate with that. Like, I feel very conscious now about like, oh my God, like, what role models are there? What media is there? What is there to show something different other than this? And now I feel like the dude, I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. There's like Rey Skywalker toys, like, cool, let's do that,
right?
But it's an interesting perspective, and it's one too, kind of segueing out of that. Like, that's one of the things I really appreciate about the horror genre right now, is like, there are a lot of female voices that are coming in, and just, it's not that they're, it's not, and there are some of these, but it's not specifically movies that are like, we're going to subvert the male gaze and like, we're going to do the opposite. But it's literally just the little changes in perspective that you notice, that you're like, oh, I've never seen that before, because it's been dudes directing these types of movies for so long.
Yeah.
What were some of those key moments? I know obviously like the girls spying on the guys showering is such an obvious twist of like what you would see in an 80s or 90s slasher. Like, were you sitting there thinking about certain scenes and going like, how do I turn those on their head? Or like, what are some perspectives you think were missed in a lot of horror movies, up to this point? And I know like there's been a lot of female directed horror movies, but in mainstream horror, what are some things you think have been kind of missed from the visual conversation or like the script conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think just even having female voices coming to the table is a huge step forward. But even thinking back further, like the original Slumber Party Massacre, right? That was written and directed by women,
No,
but it had a producer who had a lot of power. I think was it Roger Corman?
I don't
I think it was.
remember. I
I
don't.
think it was.
Oh,
Uh,
if only I could Google it. Let me look really quick.
if only we had computers nearby.
And just so you know, anytime I'm looking down, I'm probably writing a note or looking at something. So
Okay, that's okay.
I always feel weird, like, oh, let me text while you give your answer. Slumber Party Master. I don't think it was Corman. Let me look.
I'm gonna look too. Also,
It was Roger Corman.
okay,
Oh
got my
no.
facts right.
I love
So
Roger Corman is like the most inspirational and then sometimes frustrating person.
yes, yes,
I
understood.
he
But yeah, he produced that, and I mean, he obviously had a lot of say in how it ended up turning out because there's a lot of just like literally like chess scenes, or there's
yeah,
at least one that I can think of in the locker room. And as my cat glares at me from the side here,
little Pet Cemetery action.
a little bit, my dear old boy. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that, like, especially for me, having been born in the 80s, growing up in the 90s, watching all those movies, it was always very clear that none of these movies were meant for me, right?
Sure.
It was always for men. And you just, at some point, you grow kind of desensitized to the amount of boobs that you're seeing on the
Yeah.
screen, but you're like an elephant, you never forget. And so when like for me, when I'm in a position now where I can actively write these movies and they get made, I am of course very aware
Yeah.
of where horror has come from and what I would like horror to look like in the future. And it's not to say like we're not trying to be prudish or anything, like there can't be sex. Obviously, if you've seen Killer Body Count, there's a lot of sex in that movie. But I mean, there's just like we don't need to be, leering at a woman's ass for like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Like this is not, we don't need to see that. Everybody's got an ass. Like I don't really want to look at a man's ass for 5 seconds. Like it's just tell me the story, not show me the body parts
Right.
unless they're, dismembered from the body itself.
Right. Or it's integral to the story, like a Hellraiser, where it's
Yeah.
like that's Hellraiser without
Oh, Hellraiser.
nudity
Yeah.
and sex would be a very different movie. I don't even know what that movie would look
Exactly.
like. But yeah, I definitely get that. I think Roger Corman, I was trying to find it while you were answering, but I remember hearing an interview with a director that worked for him, and he had like a kind of like Lifetime. He had his rules for movies, but like it was like every so many minutes you have to have like a boob shot for the movie to work. He had like the formula. Then he had a bunch of other things too. Like if there's a motorcycle, you have to blow it up. Like there was a bunch of random rules and things.
That's fair.
But yeah, the motorcycle one, cool. Yeah, it's definitely, again, like it's one of those things where like Slumber Party Massacre, like you see those little bits of things that are very different, and then you see like, oh, we didn't have the chance to go all the way with this, or we had to do these
Mm-hmm.
other things to get it through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what's your take on have you seen Revenge? The 20 Okay, I figured before even asking, but what was your take on how that movie handled, because the big difference for me going into it was like rape revenge genre is my least favorite generally,
Yeah.
because
Same.
but it's always because the movies are usually about an hour of rape or
Yep.
torture and then about 15 minutes of get him back, whereas
Yep.
revenge is the opposite, and I think it's
Yeah.
very tactful, but like it also very much plays up the male gaze in the beginning of the movie, like, and all the tropes and things that you'd expect. Like, what was your take on how they kind of handled that blend?
Yeah. I think too, like all these revenge rape stories from before were all, pretty much written and directed by men. Revenge is written and directed by a woman. So
Yeah,
I feel like she came into it very aware, of course, of what she was doing. And so everything felt very intentional, right? And So while it's uncomfortable to watch, of course, sexual assault and all that,
Yeah.
you know that it's coming from a woman. And I think knowing that, there's almost like a bit of a safety net to it too. You're like, okay, I know that she's not gonna, like, throw a Roger Corman sort of
Yeah.
sequence in there. There's no locker room scene. And then to have spoiler at the end where like the guy is just like literally running naked through the house, right? To
Yeah.
kind of like the tropes on the side, how it's usually just the woman who's naked all the time running about. I mean, I just thought it was a really well done uh film as far as that genre goes. But yeah, it's one of those movies where you watch once and you like it and then you'll never watch it again because it is hard to watch. Same with The Nightingale
I haven't
with
seen that.
Jennifer Kent did. That one is very intense. That is like a murder, rape, revenge story, and it's very good, but it is very hard to watch.
Jennifer Kent, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Add to watch
Yep.
list. There we go.
There you go. It's probably on Tubi somewhere.
It's on Canopy, which is
Okay.
also underrated streaming service.
Yes.
Yeah. Was there any thought of, because like I said, like obviously you flip the perspective in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of like the slow-mo guys, like them looking at the guys the way, it's always been flipped. In terms of gore, you were heavily encouraged by Tubi, like ramp that up, which I was surprised. I wanted to ask, like, how'd you guys get them to do that? Which but in terms of nudity, like, and I actually saw a review that mentioned this, that they were like, oh, I wish they would have just gone all the way and done like full male nudity in one scene or something, and like really just turn it completely. Was that ever a
Yeah.
thought? Was that ever even an option? Or was it something that was like, like what you were saying, where it's like, let's focus on just moving us along and not gazing at, obviously a guy's ass is not something you want to stare at for too long, on screen, but
sometimes it's nice, but like you have to be fair. You can't
Yeah.
have a guy's ass and not a girl's ass, right? You got to balance the
equality.
playing field.
Yeah.
Right? We're all about equality here. In terms of the male nudity, I definitely wrote full frontal
Okay.
into it, but it all depends on the actor, of course, being, comfortable with that, because I think a lot of people forget too that actors are human beings, and he maybe doesn't want his penis out there for the world to see,
Yeah.
which is fair. So it would have been nice to do, and to be Denishka could probably talk more about how, that talk went with Tubi, because I think she maybe had to fight a little bit. Yeah. Write down, how hard was it to get a penis in this movie?
Welcome to the show. How hard to Okay, goodbye.
Let's talk about dick. Okay. We definitely, it was definitely written as such, because Tubi also really wanted a euphoria feeling type show without as much of the exploitiveness that's in there. So
I haven't watched it, but it sounds like, speaking of male gaze, there might be some.
I've seen one episode. That's about it. But yeah, so I mean, they were definitely open to it, and some things had to, have deeper conversations on about, and some things made it and some things didn't, which is just the nature of filmmaking. But it was definitely written as such.
Gotcha. You kind of teased at the beginning of the conversation that the original draft of the script was more cosmic. That can mean many things, and there's a lot of images floating through my mind. What did that originally look like? And what was kind of that original extra layer to the movie?
I wanted to essentially take back Lovecraft and make it more diverse, because he was a huge racist, and also make it a bit more feminine too, because all of his stuff is very male heavy. And so the first, I don't even know if it even made it to draft, but it did make it to an outline where Cammy was part of more of a cosmic plan in that, and she was more related to the fish god that Lovecraft, the deep ones, that sort of thing. And Tubi was like, no. So I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to save that for something else.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that about Lovecraft. That's interesting to know. But
I
but
mean, is he a product of the era? Is he maybe
sure.
just an asshole? I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say.
No.
He's dead.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I was curious if it was like, how is there a tentacle monster at the end going to come through and, start wreaking havoc? Maybe.
Yeah.
uh,
There might have been.
yeah. Yeah. I have such an interesting relation to, because I don't read a lot of fiction, which I know is like, I'm always like, people are ready to throw spears at me when I say that, but I just, most of what I read is always like biographies, and like I love reading, but fiction, I love the visuals, and like I want to see it. And when I do read fiction, I usually have watched something where I can go like, okay, I can picture all the characters now as them, even if the book's completely different. It's like, okay, now I can picture you as this person. So Lovecraft, I've never read Lovecraft, but I've watched movies, like obviously, that are heavily inspired by him, and
Yeah.
I've never really been drawn into any of it. Like, they feel on paper, I'm like, that sounds awesome. And then I watch it, I'm like, oh, there's something that doesn't connect, and I have no idea why. It's like the one thing that I just like always go back to, and I'm like, I should like him now. Why don't I?
The best Lovecraft movie that is not Lovecraft at all is In the Mouth of Madness. John Carpenter. Sam Neill is in it. Love him, of course.
Yeah.
From the Jurassic Park era.
Right.
But like, yeah, that is the best non-Lovecraft movie.
Interesting.
So highly recommended.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Carpenter, you can't go wrong.
It's been on my list forever, but I just have never gotten into it. Like, a lot of them too. Like, I've watched like Castle Freak, which is like it's fine, and then like the biggest one that's like everyone always pushes Reanimator, and then like I've sat down to watch Reanimator so many times, and I just don't like that movie at all. Like, it's that, to me, that's one, not to make you co-sign something that you're not saying, so I'll put my neck out for ready to be mad at, but like Reanimator is one of the movies that I watch where, like, to me it's the worst version, because like I'm talking about male gaze, but like I also love De Palma, so like there's a little bit of hypocrisy when you like watching movies where it's like, but I also enjoy movies where people made movies clearly instead of going to therapy, so like give me the De Palma movies. But Reanimator was one of those movies where the male gaze was like so crazy, where I was like, I don't know if the characters hate this woman or if the movie hates this woman. and like that's always been, and I love Barbara Crampton, I love the music, I love the effects in it, but like when it gets to that third act, I'm just like, this feels so mean-spirited in a way that like it's just really rough. And again, it's kind of pushed me off of like that whole realm of like the Brian Usna movies, that I just and then I forget who, Stuart Gordon, like all that sphere of movies that people love and rock t-shirts for. I'm like, I'm not interested in going back into that world. Like,
yeah, they have a certain take on it, that's for sure. I think Stuart Gordon's stuff, having seen Castle Freak and
From
Beyond,
yeah.
From Beyond, yeah, that one especially too.
Wrong. Yeah, it is From Beyond.
Okay. From Beyond, like I actually just watched it recently because I'd never seen it, and then
it's sitting there on my list.
Crampton is in it. Barbara Crampton is in it too, but she like at some point dons like dominatrix gear and stuff, and she's supposed to be a scientist, and I'm like,
it's like
I love you, Barbara, but
yeah,
no, girl, no. I mean, obviously it was not her choice, I'm gonna assume.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah, it's they're products of a different time.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if those types of takes on things would necessarily be as well received today as they were in the 80s.
Yeah.
But they exist, and we can only watch them and learn from them.
Yeah, watch them in their time. Yeah, and like I said, there's always that, like, there's things we love that like we go like we bristle against certain things, and like I said, like I watched Body Double for the first time because I'd watched Maxine, and then I was like, well, Body Double, I know has been referenced a lot in this, but I don't know where. So I watched Body Double and was like, man, I love De Palma. De Palma has some screws loose, but again, I never feel again, it's like feels different with him where I feel like it's like he isn't even aware. I feel like on some level, like it's kind of like Ari Aster's movies. Like there's some things you're like, oh wow, where's that coming from? And he probably couldn't even put his finger on it. But anyway, yeah, all that to say, the Lovecraft world, like I every time I hear someone describe it, I'm like, that sounds so amazing. I'd love to see a take that like really grips me. I just, like I said, that whole pool of movies and the directors that have made them, I'm just like, I have to try another one of these. I don't know. So
you will find the right one. I recommend the John Carpenter one because, he's John Carpenter.
yeah. Well, please write yours so we can launch it. And
okay.
Tubi,
I just need a couple $1 million to get it done. Somebody wants to throw that at me.
Right. I was going to ask that. In terms of the kills, that was the biggest, like, oh, there's real blood in this, and like it's not just a little CGI spurt of something like you see in a lot of movies, especially the disemboweling scene. I was like, what? What? Like I was almost like, how'd this happen in this movie? When you were writing, like obviously, like when we're talking like tentacle monster, that's a crazy budget thing. When we're talking, but when we're talking practical blood and guts, that's also an expense that people undervalue. Like there's some real cost to that. You're resetting, you add shooting time, like all that sort of stuff. Did you write like when you sit down to write for any project, but this one specifically, do you write like there's a blank check for those moments and then they can scale it down? Or do you write it going like, what's possible do I think? And I'll write for that. Because like, again, these are decisions that I have to imagine, like you can't just be like, oh, we're gonna have them explode and we'll shoot that 50 times. Like we got to really pick and choose here.
Yeah. So for me, sometimes am not always aware of the budget, but sometimes am. For this one, at the beginning, I didn't know what range they were gonna be in, so and even if I did, I was just gonna write to my heart's content anyway. Because I always feel like you should shoot big at first, and then if you need to scale it back, then you can. Hopefully, without sort of compromising the main vision of what you are trying for. So, yeah, I mean, the kills as I wrote them are pretty much all as they were in the script. And I would say even better, especially the disemboweling. I wasn't sure how they were gonna go ahead with that, and I thought it like turned out wonderfully.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with that. Some great CGI there, some great special effects, but also for the film, a lot of great practical effects too.
Yeah.
And I think for us as we were developing it, we were all coming from the same love of the 80s, 90s movies that, relied on the practical effects. And so to see that being used in this for a lot of stuff was very heartwarming.
Yeah.
Despite the grotesqueness of it all.
Right.
I loved it. I thought it was great because like, I think having a nice blend of practical and CGI is a great way to go.
Yeah.
Just to enhance things more, especially with all the technology that we have. Like there's ways to make it look great without it looking like, like it's Avatar or something like that. But just to have the practical use in there, especially with the thurible scene and all that, I thought was wonderful.
Yeah.
I thought it turned out really well. The makeup department did a great job.
Right. Yeah. No, Danishka shared a behind the scenes of the disemboweling scene and risky posting to TikTok. I was like, you're going to get banned. But I was like, oh, more of this because it was such a cool example. And I think I wish more filmmakers would, with stricter budgets, because I think like the idea is like, oh, we'll just do it from scratch really cheap and it looks really like really bad. It's like bad CGI, or they do like really hammy practical that doesn't hold up and it's like that's a mannequin that you just threw out a window. And I love the stuff like you said where it merges the practical CGI, like the practical like for that one the body that's built and then you're just erasing the seams and adding it to the actor. I'm like, that's it. And that's so much easier than all the things people try to do. And anyway, I really love that stuff. And it's one of those things, like, it's not just good for like, hey, that looks good for a low budget, Tubi movie. It's like, that looks good for any movie. That's a really cool shot,
Yeah,
which is great.
yeah. I was very impressed. Yeah.
I haven't done this in a minute in these interviews, but I used to always do kind of a rapid round at the end when I see we've got a few minutes left. So I'm gonna ask you some kind of rapid fire questions. I always say rapid fire, and then like one of them, people go like, let's talk about that. That's fine too. If we end up doing that, that's
Okay.
great. But I'm gonna run through these and get your answers. First, what's the best decade of film history?
Oh.
Start
Start
easy.
with the hardest question. Yeah.
That's the easy one.
Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. The 80s. Despite just I have to elaborate a little bit. Despite all the male gaze that was happening at the time, there are some absolutely amazing movies that came out in the 80s with practical effects, right? With story, with everything. Also, I mean, that's what I grew up on, so there's a sense of nostalgia with it too.
Basically, if you watch any movie ever, you have to add like a disclaimer of some sort. It's like, I'm a huge like Buster Keaton fan. And so like, but sometimes, the 1920s wasn't the most, so you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this Native American dance scene's a little uncomfortable, but, but I was thinking about that even in terms of like my nostalgia point. Like for a lot of people, the nostalgia point is like, oh, I grew up watching the 80s. And like, for me, it is the early 2000s, but like you watch like early Final Destination movies or Saw movies or whatever, it like, maybe not Saw, actually. Those were pretty, I don't think there's much in there that's dated poorly that I can think of. But there's a lot of like early 2000s where it's like, oh, there's a lot of really messed up jokes throughout here. So, because you always think your generation's the best, and then you're like, oh, we all have to explain something to our kids at some point.
Absolutely. The other day when I was younger, my favorite movie was The Monster Squad.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I rewatched it. It actually got released in theaters like maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I went to go see it, having not seen it in a long time. There were moments in there that I was like, "Oh no,
yeah,
oh no, oh
yeah."
Hey, but like,
product of the
it,
time,
right?
yeah.
You grew up watching it, and it still like holds a very special place in your heart. So you kind of like have to turn a blind eye to these things, even though you're talking shit about other movies for doing the same thing. You're just like, no, but this one is special.
We all have our hypocrisy. Like I said, it's, we all have our thing. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
Oh my God. These questions are not rapid fire.
Sorry.
Oh Lord. Oh God. Yes. Okay. I know the answer.
Check the shelf.
So I don't have it hanging up yet, but I have a poster for Deliria, aka Stage Fright, aka Aquarius. Aquaria. It had many different names. I just saw it recently, like past couple of years, because it got onto Shudder, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Like on the poster, you can kind of see there's like an owl head guy on there. That was the killer's mask, and it is the most beautiful mask in all slasher
letterboxing right now.
There you go. Put that at the top of your list.
Okay.
It is a beautiful giallo from this, I want to say 70s, maybe 80s.
1987.
87. Okay.
It's hard to tell. Giallos literally all look like they were made in 1972. Like no matter what year you watch it, you're like, oh, it was the 70s in Italy for like 30 years. Wow.
Yeah, and it still is. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful movie, and I mean, it's a pretty like standard plot. There are actors. They're doing a play about, I think possibly about this lunatic I mean, that's not the PC word anymore. But he's in an insane asylum, also not the PC word anymore. And then he of course escapes and then locks them in their theater and kills them one by one. But it is a gorgeous movie.
Sold.
And yeah, to be able to remake that with that beautiful owl head, that would be magical.
That would be awesome. Yeah. I read one of the first reviews says, an escape maniac finds his way into a theater production, grabs an axe, knife, and chainsaw, dons an owl head mask, and goes to town the trapped actors. Sold. Greenlit.
All you need to
let's
know.
watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great movie.
I love going through giallos, and just like slashers, there's so much that's not great. And then when you find the one that is, you're like, yes, this is perfect.
Place in your heart, and it's so hard to find the good ones, right? And
Yeah.
it takes you have to wade through a lot of shit to find the one that just sticks with you.
Right.
This one is not a giallo, but one that I saw recently. I keep saying recently, but it's been years at this point. Also on Shudder is Psycho Gorman, which is the big creature feature, like ridiculous, absurd, delightful.
That's
that
Kostansky.
Yeah.
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 I like his stuff.
Yeah.
He's another one that, like, within these very tight constraints, like the new Leprechaun movie that he did was like, I was like, holy moly, this is awesome. So,
I haven't seen that one, but I saw the Void. The Void is really good.
That's Lovecraftian, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, actually.
And that's why I haven't watched it yet. So I gotta check it out.
That's a good one. It's not overtly Lovecraftian, so
I'll check
put
it out.
that at the top of your list.
Yeah, I'll check it out. You need to watch his Leprechaun movie. It is so fun, and it was a sci-fi original, and I went into it expecting like kind of like a Sharknado vibe, and the practical gore in that is crazy. Just when you see the sprinkler scene, you'll be thrilled. So check it out.
Okay, I'm very intrigued.
Which, if you had to program a double feature with Killer Body Count, what movie would you pair with it?
Scream.
Okay, interesting. And the first Scream.
The first Scream, yes.
Is that
always
your favorite?
The OG. Yes, because it's the one that I think I was maybe 10 or 11 when it came out. That's the one we watched at sleepovers. That's the one that kind of started the slasher thing for me. Like all my friends would be, hiding behind sheets, and I was just like, more, please. And I just like all those other movies we've talked about, a very special place in my heart, right? Because it's the OG. It is what it is. It started it for me anyway.
Yeah.
That was kind of the gateway for me to go back then into the 80s, right? And start exploring, other Wes Craven movies, right. other directors of those times. And it's a great movie.
What is a movie people would be surprised to know you enjoy?
I love The Shawshank Redemption. It's probably one of my favorite non-horror movies. I also love Jurassic Park, but I mean that's
still Stephen King, still
Steven Spielberg.
Or isn't Shawshank Stephen King?
Oh, Stephen King, yeah, it's Shawshank. Yeah. Very different for him too, I guess. But that's one of the best movies I think ever made. I also really love Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
Like the Keira Knightley one.
That was the next question.
I don't like
which one.
Yeah. I don't like romance movies, but I love period romance movies.
Gotcha.
Like I can watch, but I haven't seen Bridgerton. I don't know if I'm into that, but I like the Pride and Prejudice, and like there was an Emma one with Anya Taylor-Joy that I really liked.
I started it and it didn't get super drawn into it, but I want to rewatch it and see, because I feel like again it was one of those things like you have to be in a certain mood, and I was like kind of went into it like, and also I watched it because I was like going through like other Mia Goth movies, and then was like, well, it was so tonally different where I was like, I need to just go back in expecting what the movie is and go into it. Persuasion with Dakota Johnson is great if you haven't seen that on Netflix.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Very good. It's like it feels kind of like Sofia Coppola light, like it's kind of like modern feeling but set in the period. So I think you'd probably like it if you like that period and kind of like a hip Pride and Prejudice vibe. It's a good one. Who do you think's the most underrated artist working today? This could be writer, director, actor, like someone you just feel like they don't get enough love.
Ooh, well, there's definitely a lot of writers that I
Jess Landry.
Type up.
Go check out her work today.
Me? Yeah, no. A lot of my colleagues, though, in that space, Gemma Files is a huge one. She's written, dozens of novels and short story collections, and I personally think is the best Canadian writer that's still working
Mhm.
today, and a lot of people are not super familiar with her, which is a shame. She writes very like transgressive sort of horror, real life, witchy fiction, which
Okay.
is great. Gwendolyn Keist is another one. Full disclosure, I used to work on the publishing side of things and published a few of her novels, so I am a built-in fan of hers.
Yeah.
Her stuff is a lot of like feminist takes on, coming of age stories, which I think is wonderful.
Hmm.
On the filmmaking side of things, I think Danishka needs a shout out because she is doing so much good stuff,
Yeah.
and she should be doing like the big Hollywood blockbusters because she just has such a great eye
Yeah.
and she's a very nice person.
Yeah. I'd love to see, just from what she's done so far, I'd love to see her get a good, like, even a healthy budget movie where it's like I can
Yes.
really do some of these crazier things that I want to do. And
Yeah.
it is one, without throwing anybody under the bus, like when I was watching Killer Body Count, like I was sitting there and then I was reading reviews and things and like and you know some dudes in the horror space I feel like are so like they're so forgiving of time, budget, shot when it comes to some of the popular guys that I would say are peers of Danishka who do like these kind of mid-range like horror films. And I'm just like, I see so much real genius in her work. And there's things that I'm like, man, she deserves to get to go to that next level. But like, it is an uphill battle, I know, for her being a woman in the industry. Cause like, again, I see guys who churn out some stuff that I love and then churn out some stuff that's not great, but they keep getting projects. So I'm like, yeah, this feels super odd. And I'm sure we both have different names coming to mind, but there's definitely some
There's a
vibes
few.
there. Last question. What's the best piece of advice you would give to an aspiring filmmaker who is listening to this?
Never stop. Don't let anybody tell you that you cannot do this. And I know that that sounds pretty generic in terms of like advice, but it's very true.
Right.
You have to be very tenacious in this industry to get stuff done. You also have to have a good body of work, right? You have to have
A killer
something that's
body of work.
sellable. You have to have a killer body of work. Wow. Yeah, no, you do though. You need to have like something
I'm a great
that other
writer.
people
Look
are
at that.
excited about. I mean, you are. Maybe we'll put you on Killer Body Count too, if
Yes.
Tubi gives us that.
No, actually, don't do that. I think you should do that. Don't put me in that mix of. It'll just be puns, like really bad puns through the whole movie, which
I
is
love
no
it.
good.
I love it.
But
I love puns. But yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, keep at it. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't. Filmmaking itself, if you're coming into it with kind of nothing behind you, like I have no connections or anything in here, it can be very expensive to get into it too, especially if you're like want to do your own short films and stuff. Like it's sort of an elitist kind of industry to be in, which is a damn shame because there are a lot of talented people out there who have not been given their chance or their shot just because of barriers like that. And I mean, look to your local film industry resources, look to the, bodies of government that can help out. There are ways to get grants and loans to get it done. For the filmmaking side of things, writing is a little bit cheaper because you can do it at home. You just need a computer or a piece of paper, even. But yeah, never stop trying to get in there because, you got to fight for it's not like a regular job where you can just show up like 9 to 5 and be done with it, right? You really have to like dedicate your whole life to it, essentially. It becomes your whole life. And so if you have that drive and you have that talent, then fucking go for it. You can do it. I believe in you.
what do you think is the difference? Because there's that advice, and I always like to follow up with this question because like I panic about this all the time in my own like I'm doing a lot of video production work in a different realm completely. And like one of the things that I always stress about is like there's people I see and can identify where they're pursuing something. I'm like, they should quit because they're not good at this. Where do you balance the difference between like people telling you like, you're going the wrong direction, you're doing this poorly. And then that other side of like, trust your gut, keep pushing forward. You know, you have something like, cause like, you know, it like that, there's that balance. Cause like some people should stop, you know, cause like they're not cut out for this thing. And then there's other people that like, they should keep going. Don't listen to your parents. They're like, go to medical school, you know, like, but there's people that don't go to medical school and then are not good screenwriters, you know? So it's like, how do you balance that? And maybe even with mentors, like, do you have a select few that you let speak into your stuff like that? Or do you just kind of block out everybody and just go like, I believe in myself. Here we go.
Hmm. I think speaking on mentors, especially at the beginning of your career, they are a very vital piece of how your future is going to look. Finding someone who is willing to give you that time of day and to give you feedback and to give you opportunities, like, could be the difference between you having a career and you not having a career. For me, I have a couple of mentors that, you know, I would not be here talking to you without them, right? They gave me my first jobs. We still talk, right? And now that I'm starting with I have my own production company and doing my own sort of TV and film projects, I'm now being able to repay them for the time that they spent for me for free by, you know, giving them jobs on my stuff and like getting their feedback again on things. So it is extremely important to find someone who can mentor you and who can help push you forward. In terms of whether or not you should, because maybe you have something that isn't great, who's to say, right? Like, art is very subjective.
Sure.
A lot of people do not like Killer Body Count, but a lot of people like Killer Body
Yeah.
Count, right? It's like
Right.
everybody has their own flavor of things. Everybody is going to hate something or love something. It is what it is. I think that you should just try regardless. Like, if you have faith in yourself and you know that you can do it, go do it. Even if you have people telling you that you can't or your idea sucks or whatever, like, I've had people tell me my writing sucks, right? But
I'm getting paid
fucking
for
pissed
it.
off about that, right? Like,
Right.
I keep getting paid for it, so it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's always going to be the haters, right? That tell you and try to bring you down. And a huge part of this industry too is the rejections. There are a ton of rejections, even for like more established people, mid-level, beginner. Like, it happens at every level all the time, right? Like, Guillermo del Toro was supposed to do a Lovecraft adaptation, right? In the Mountains of Madness, and that never happened. So if somebody like him can't get something made, I mean, us peons below him are probably going to hit those same struggles as well.
Right.
But it's just about balancing it all out, taking the negativity, and, you know, sometimes the feedback that you get from a rejection can be helpful. Sometimes you're just going to like crumple it up and throw it out and burn it and, you know, never think of it ever again, which is perfectly fine. But yeah, just keep trying. Just go.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody get in your ear, and just do it. If you believe in it, then that's all that matters.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for doing this. I'm glad it happened, and glad Danishka connected us. It was, I felt bad for you. I was like, man, she got roped into my interview unawares, but no, I'm really glad this happened. The minute your camera came on and I saw your shelf, I was like, oh, we could talk for 3 hours. Okay, great. But
we
yeah,
probably could. Yes.
I really appreciate it. I hope it's not the last time we chat. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.